So welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good break and your brain are fresh for the next talk. I'm warmly welcome Pedro Walpole for the next talk. I will do a short introduction. So Pedro Walpole, he works in a sustainable environment and community land management in South Asia, with mainly local communities, universities, international organizations, and governments. He practiced a people-focused approach to capacity building and seeks to promote local populations and governments, to support local populations and governments. He is the global coordinator for Eco-Jesuits, research director for the Environmental Science for Social Change, and the coordinator for the River Above Asia Ocean Ecclesial Network. Long name. He also directs the Abu Balamguan Cultural Education Center. I do not. You will pronounce it right. An upload basic education program and technical training for indigenous children in northern Mindanao that has its own cultural-based curriculum and promotes multilingual education and the use of the mother tongue. And he lives with the Hulangian, an upland indigenous community in Mindanao. So welcome, Pedro. So we're looking forward for your testimonial. Thank you. And the title you have already listened.
You have it there.
Yeah.
So my thanks to all of you for this invite, for your participation and the discussions we're already sharing. My gratitude. I'm usually speaking from a scientific and a social change context. So at this stage, I'm going in and out of another door to respond to the 4 questions given to me. But first, let me explain this Apo Palamguan. Let me speak from my basic context where I live in terms of community, relations, and mission. So it's very difficult to follow on from Fabian, but this is on the story level. Yeah. I'm living among rural communities for many decades. The indigenous and those struggling with practical things like determining the time of the crop to be planted, short-term work experiences that the youth have where I am, the challenge of education or of trying to sustain a community objective at the margins. In working on the land, the relationships, the thoughts and daily practices are integral with the presence of the Creator in this indigenous context. People have an inherent, rugged spiritual understanding and practice of relations with the land. Though not in conflict with being Catholic, are seldom connected. Other people in the area where I live are near island migrants. They came originally with the logging operations, and they face many of the same challenges, but with a different world view. They may have come over a generation or two, while their sense of faith obligation is sustained over a lifetime of humble presence to God through the preaching of the church and various devotions. For 30 years, I live on a daily basis in community contexts, not just here in Mindanao, but visits throughout Asia. My work has been professionally in terms of community forest management, a lot of involvement with the UN and FAO, community disaster awareness, because if we're not aware, we've cut most of the forest in Asia. And my background is as a hydrologist, I follow the water downstream to the disasters. And so I work a lot with resilience. And for much of this time in the context of indigenous communities. I engage in disaster risk reduction primarily with governments and with communities. And since the disaster of 1991 in the Philippines, I have mapped each disaster for over 20 years, seeing what actually is happening. I have a satellite laboratory where we do a lot of the data analysis, and so the story of Chad resonates very particularly with me. For a number of weeks in the year, I'm globe-trotting, trying to weave together the diversity of experiences and capacities, contexts, and the will for change. Change in a global society is elusive. Meanwhile, the MDGs has become the SDGs, and I'm not sure what DGs they will be after this. The UNFCCC process in 30 years has brought little committed action, failing in the face of needed urgency. And yet there is a time for tilting windmills. It can be inspirational in character, engaging others in the broader social vision and advocacy. Let me speak of relations. The most valuable starting point, as I said yesterday, is really in the welcome and how people are invited, how they feel personally safe and comfortable in our dialogues. As we've been saying in different ways, God, in creating the cosmos and the earth, also created the person. But sensitivity to these interwoven relations is often missing, and thus there is the great call for the triple reconciliation. There are more than 20 creation stories, if you like, or references in the Bible. Yet in recent centuries, reference to the relation with creation and its importance in our own story as Catholics has been lost. I associate mission with struggle, as when I sense the grace of Jesus, who saw the sheep without a shepherd and had great compassion and healing wherever he went. In today's context, in the margins, it is a struggle to live by this mode of reconciliation and not be overtaken by societal and governmental gaps, economic extraction of the last peso, project deliverables, increasing loss of seasons, and the fleeting nature of my own actions, in that what I do today is gone tomorrow. Okay, how did I perceive the process of conversion and arrive at commitment? Conversion can happen after a confrontation or a painful event, and Fabian has done a lot to help us understand this. We don't always have to fall off of a horse to change within. I have to be free, however, in that moment of conversion. so that I can without waver unite with the call in my very being, my very sense of being. Then the questions, the doubts, simply drop away, as with the astrologer. Yeah? Reflective moments are occasions for being open, yeah, to the experience and the challenge. Maybe he said in a different way this morning, but similar, my attitude is formed by the familiarity and being able to respond. At some point, there is a decision, a quiet moment where things fall into place. Basically, thoughts and feelings fit. And they give a new sense of being, always with hope. Consolation is humbly found in the most difficult times, because I don't need consolation in happy times. Yeah, it's consolation in itself. This is not an easy choice, especially for the indigenous where I live, though they grow up with a deep relation with creation and the creator spirit. Many drop out of school, predominantly the boys, and eventually find work in huge poultry farms or in the city. A few get to study in the local universities. The economy generally denies us the possibility of staying sustainably on the land. This is what the structural sin is, that we have to live through, we have to suffer. So the suffering generation is very tangible to me. The question given me was, how did I perceive the process of conversion and what was my experience? So I go a little back in time. I won't say a century, but half a century. My conversion is a story of inclusion and is ongoing. The question brought me back to my childhood and the love of my mother and father for the garden and the marshlands. I realized at this stage in life how blessed I was by my parents. It is not to be assumed. I grew up really with dogs and horses as constant companions in the afternoon. I happened to go to school in the morning because I had to. They would go anywhere I wanted. Yeah. They'd sense the mood, they'd wait, or they'd race ahead. They'd nuzzle me, awaken my senses, and let me know that they are there and that I am not alone. I know that they were listening to me, whatever I said to them. I didn't hear any answers, but I knew that I was heard, and we would go on our way. I had a lovely job as a youth, calming children on how to approach animals. It could be watching the birds in the swamp, calling, courting, nesting, feeding, all with a distance, but with an awe-filled presence. Within their attentiveness, I could be watching the stillness and the stealth of a heron by the river and feeling instinctively exactly when the heron would move. Most of my job was often holding the horses and giving the youth a leg up. First off, it was so confusing for them. I could see their eyes, and it was a slow balance to trust me, to trust the horse, and to trust the leg up. Yeah, but when they were up there, how glorious was their beam. Life had suddenly grown exponentially. They now had a new companion with whom to communicate through all of their senses, not just speech. They had to ride as one with shared senses. So it's good to return to our childhood senses and discover memories anew. Listening to God is not simply about words. It involves all the senses, and this is why listening within is so crucial. We don't just have 6 senses. Yeah, the 6th sense involves about 15 other senses. The latest I read is that we have 21 senses or 33 senses, if we distinguish them all. We are aware of the senses like body temperature, balance. As you get old, the balance is very important. The heartbeat, yeah? Focusing on breathing helps us keep our balance spiritually, yeah? And we appreciate with this breathing the silence around and all its richness. We feel it. Some people register geomagnetic flows, while we may be unaware of senses like interoception. Interoception is very interesting. It's the feedback of information from the organs in the body to the brain, and how this can help us balance our emotional signals. If we tune into it, we understand, yeah, how we can balance our emotions. So we know where we are in our body and in our openness to all else. We're a huge array of senses that we really chop up and don't make any coherence of. Bringing all senses into play, being already attuned to the calm within, is an essential part of reconciliation. We have to find that peace that the world does not give us, but that Jesus gives us. And that's within. One youth recently said to me, he feels better when he speaks to God. Yeah, he just said it to me as we were walking one stage, and I stopped. And he said, I feel the silence and the patient answer within. I thought, wow, this is, yeah, a man on a journey. It was beautiful. We get these, I get these responses at times, and it's very clear Christ is there long before I am. Okay, at the age of 14, I sought to stop bulldozers from demolishing the last playing fields and the trees for another housing project near where I lived. Every one of the 210 homes along the road signed the petition. Sonny Darcy, who had the riding school, and I went with many of the children and 9 horses, of course, down to the city hall. And we had an evening dialogue with the city council. They'd never had a dialogue with this before. It was obvious to me, yeah, as a youth, what needed to be done. The others must have really seen this unbelievably amusing, but yet the avenue and the playing fields of Fort Greene in the town of the Swamp are there today. And I hope in some corner, the Corn Creek, which is what I was really interested in protecting, the Corn Creek still creaks. This is where the conversion is unknowing. I grew up serving early morning mass in the Crescent, which I now realize was so paced and spaced that the inner stillness and attentiveness to the priest gave time and place for life to echo and feel the presence, knowing exactly again when to move with purpose. I would see Jesus in the gospel, walking the land, never hurting anything of creation, and enjoying the landscape, his creation. He uses the work of those on the land and the landscape, creation and sentient life around, to explain many valued relations, and reflecting all this in his teachings with the people through love and compassion. The Eucharist centers the body and the spirit, and from the nature that we work with our hands, a simple cycle of life is offered, received by God and affirmed. This is another form of ecology. It's God's ecology. My heart had put it together, but my mind wasn't there. I lived on Mount Kinabalu, 13,435 feet high. As a park ecologist, it was the most ideal job I could have ever imagined. Seeing the sun rise over the dome of the earth, spreading out below. Many times I felt the suffering of the land and the life, the laboring of the Kadazan communities, the biodiversity we sought to protect, and the copper mines. Somehow, offering all of this in the redeeming celebration of the dawn, of the goodness of God before me, gave me a feeling of great hope beyond anything I could do. I realized there was nothing of importance of my doing in this great scene. All of this journey from the Pike River to Mount Kinabalu and now Pulangi Valley is an interior journey bringing together all the senses of body and spirit, body and soul, attuned and stimulated, while yearning for a reality not yet fully found. This is the creation we are born into, and where we directly experience the presence of Creator and come to know God in our daily works and offerings. We are creation, and we don't realize it. We're so often individuals sitting in concrete offices. Yeah, and we're cut off, and we have a job to do. So many of you are giving the spiritual exercises. This is a beautiful gift, yeah, to have the senses open. There is no singular reality. I cannot use nature on occasion by simply listening to the sounds and seeing the sights, as if I'm tuning into God's TikTok on creation. Yeah. And then exit without any real commitment. Yeah. Integral ecology is not a spiritual course in biology. Yeah. But where all of reality is connected, the personal with creation and landscape, people and climate, that further opens us to the sense of God in all relations. This sensitivity, this being creation at all times, this knowing other sentient beings is just so important. And this is all the indigenous have. They have no power to change the world. They don't have the answers, but they have a life that is deeply close, it's deeply related to the Creator. I share frustrations and exhaustion with my community members, Jesuit community members as well, while our institutions are so slow to change. I meet a lot of silence in my life as I try to explain the crisis of the land and of the people. The time of being with, of silent accompaniment, is the most meaningful in the long run. And finding peace in the presence that is not focused on success. I have had many people tell me, yes, Pedro, what you do is great, but actually it's really not going to work. You have no financial basis to what you're doing. And there's no sustainability in it. But that I have lived this for 30 years is enough for me. And I leave it up to God's grace in terms of the people I live with to find ways to continue. Conversion needs to be experienced in community and can be found in collective interaction, accumulating good feelings and sensitivities with hopeful action. Conversion needs to lead to broader action, and for many of us, we are urgently called to engage in the broader socio, political, economic, financial realms of our society. So, trying to speed up, what are the main ecological and social issues in that particular field? Different generations of today are wary of any promises of reconciliation, as there is little effective commitment. Terms are conditional. There are few processes of accountability in much of what we see. On the other hand, what gets me is that the hunger and the wars are both local and widespread. Malnutrition is poorly reported, and conflicts are seldom presented for mediation through our daily headlines. We want to provoke a wrong radicality, a political polarization. Economics and trade strategies, race, gender, all interconnect with these realities of climate change and the imbalances, along with disaster, food, water, biodiversity nexus. Yeah, the weight of this on the individual can be exhausting and paralyzing. Sometimes I get youth who come from the cities and they just cry their way through a week of being in the mountain. And this is the process. I am so affected by how the youth are affected, the withdrawals, the addictions, the refusing to believe in the possibility of ways forward, our sins of omission, sins of avoidance in the greater world. Beyond the paralysis, obstacles in our hearts are often about expectations and desires. Obstacles to a more meaningful way of living can include those that provide convenience and the desire for social acceptability. Yet these demands, along with what I feel is due to me, needs a broader integration with the larger world around. In today's world, these weaknesses also reflect a need for someone who could accompany. I think the greatest role today should be that of accompaniment. We have other obstacles. One of them is the inability to actively learn about risk unless personally experienced. 1991 defined for me Typhoon Telma as the new norm of climate. Disasters in the Philippines happen from island to island, and they continue to occur as people and local governments, national governments, seemingly believe it will not happen to them in their time or in their place. And then it does, or it returns after some decades, when all the preparedness is forgotten and people are washed down the rivers. Forests are still decreasing in the tropics. Coral reefs are bleaching at this time on a disastrous scale. What the figure will be at the end of this year for coral bleaching is shocking. And even when there is a water crisis, as many of our cities throughout the world are experiencing this summer in the northern half, infrastructure is the answer, not sustained community forest regeneration with rights and responsibilities. Politics, economics, and the common good are not coming together, while distracting attention from other basic fundamental needs of social infrastructure. The amount of social networking that you were speaking of earlier is so crucial. Yeah, it's sort of dissipated. And this is where, the social apostolate just does not have connectivity with the spiritual apostolate or with the educational apostolate. And we need to interweave, the Jesuit network. We often experience forgiveness of individual sins in the gospel and embrace God's love. I love the Gospel of Mark, where some people sort of want to duel with Jesus. And Jesus says to one in the face of many, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." This was his forgiveness of a social sin, if only the others in the crowd would respond. This was the call to all present to be humble, as with the story of throwing a stone. Eventually, the stone was thrown. Jesus dies on the cross. Jesus' very death is at the hands of social sin. And during this large scene of mockery, there is the forgiveness of the thief who spoke of their sins, believing in something better. And he enters the kingdom of God. We need to acknowledge the little steps while we work for the greater. Mind, heart, and spirit are one, and they should be thinking, feeling together, understanding what I am called to be. This oneness can be a source of peace and hope when I can respect and reconcile all of what is happening within me, and so with the world outside. The challenge is, how can all this be embraced with a positive attitude? And even more, allow us engage and be constructive. So this is a summary of concerns and attitudes, acknowledging my own struggle while connecting with how we can accompany the youth and conceive of the reconciliation needed. So how do we conceive, the question was, of this reconciliation with nature and humans? Societal reconciliation with nature calls for political will and economic commitment. We're saying the same things here from one side of the world to the other, as I see it. While inequalities are growing in many parts of the world and people are forced to compromise given the lack of options, poor public transport, cheap imports, misplaced subsidies, misinformation, it is often more difficult to address the needed changes. A process of rebuilding policies and programs that have been deconstructed, particularly in the last 20 years, you speak of the last 40 years, is very important in caring for the environment and finding ways forward. The renewed relationship with creation will take generations of networking, collaboration, and empowerment, while bound by the slow movement of institutions. It involves the sciences, but is much more than a technical fix and must find its roots in community. Each person needs, again, to form a lasting recognition of other creatures as sentient. And I think that this is what, a recollection, a retreat like this helps us reawaken to life. Where are we? 5 minutes? Sort of there. Okay. 3. Okay, I'm going to just read one paragraph and then give you 7 points. One of the blessings in my life has been to know Datu Nestor Menaling. He's the old chieftain. He's a spiritual leader of the Pulangion people. And he has brought me on several spiritual journeys where the task is impossible, but peace can be shared in community. In a history of killings, martial law, we celebrated 50 years of since its beginning last year. Through a call for a ritual, Singampu gathers his people at times in specific areas in the landscape, simply to acknowledge the loss and the suffering, and quietly addressing the impact of conflict, without any resolution between the parties, because we're caught between two warring parties. Yet, expressing the humble acceptance and affirming the peace of the community. It's a humble felt response that allows us as a community move on with hope. We haven't solved anything, but we have, again, positioned ourselves, as I say, as a community of peace. And this brings me to the word sentir. So I think I'll just, Ignatius speaks of sentir, the feeling, thinking of Saint Ignatius, of having the right attitude. He speaks of, or there are those who, he does not have the conversations with creation that Saint Francis has, but he does understand finding God in all things, in the simplicity of a flower and a leaf. And there is no way he could have written the principle and foundation to be warped into a process that allows the exploitation of nature. For me, Laudato Si 2022 or 222 echoes this sense, to be serenely present in each reality, however small it may be, opens us up to much greater horizons. Thinking with the church is another sentir for Saint Ignatius. It's very clear and is perhaps best echoed in the way Bishop Oscar Romero shepherded his church until his death. Poverty is also, we mentioned it in our walk this morning, a sentir. Yeah. Again, we need to feel this, and we intellectually feel it, but we are challenged to feel it with another 32 senses. The lived experience. Okay, I'm moving down through, and of course, sentir is the whole discussion of discernment. It's not discernment here, it's discernment of this interoception, of breathing, everything comes together. This is what Ignatius was about. So I won't go through number of chapters. Basically, Gantz's guide for the spiritual exercises is what I use extensively. And a number of the paragraphs there came up, most especially creation swallowing us up. The youth know what this means. When we see, the giant hole in the ground of mining, the ships, an endless series of ships off the coast taking our mineral sands, and no accountability. Nobody knows what money passes. People really feel they're being swallowed up. So Ignatius's view and our worldview are different, yet there is great similarity in how we go about experiencing this. And our challenge really is holding the tensions. It's not the answers. It's how we hold the tensions. So the first week brings together the grounded realities of today's world, my own participation so far in life, with a renewed worldview of faith, and a deep sense of forgiveness and openness. I can only enter this with forgiveness, not with accusation. This gives me hope that the following weeks of the exercises of hearing the call and recognizing the mission can fill and direct us with a firm sense of commitment and collaboration as co-creators in a vulnerable and threatened world, and can lead to meaningful transformation in our common home. Amen.
So thank you very much, Pedro, for your deep and interesting testimony of your life. I will suggest we will do it like we did it before, 1 minute in silence to catch maybe one sentence, one thought you had.